been lucky enough for the last few years to get to run some of these sessions and working with the events team to give some thoughts about what happened at the show and also give an opportunity for analysts and research shops to actually share some of their views and not just be a moderator. So I'm Peter Jarek. I head up the GSMA Intelligence team. It's the research and consulting arm of the GSMA. The data that you see in things like the mobile economy reports, if you were at the keynote, the data that Mats shares about the industry, that comes from my team. Super privileged to get to work with all of the operators, help them execute on the opportunities, and super privileged to get to organize things like this. Now, if some of you have been at past events, I try and keep a theme to the analysts that we have up here. So my smaller shops or technically focused analysts. And this year, my hope was to really pull in some great minds from the management consulting side of things, the folks that are talking to the C-suite, because that's a really critical viewpoint to get. And so we unfortunately had someone pull out due to a health issue, but I decided that we would maybe make things a little bit interesting this time, and I'm going to sub in, so I will actually get to not just be the moderator, but actually be a panelist and pretend I'm an analyst, put on my analyst hat, and we're going to be joined by one of the more important people from the GSMA, my colleague Jawad, who heads up our MENA region. He will be grilling us. So with that, I think what you're all here to really hear from are the other smart folks. So let's bring up our panelists. We have Priya Kurian from IBM. It's IBM Institute of Business Value. Thank you very much. And we have David Martin with BCG. And then the man of the hour who's going to be really tough on us, Jawad.
Thank you. Good morning. I like to be the Frank Sinatra approach to miking up. I think we have a spelling mistake, right, David? The Boston Consulting Group.
Okay.
It's Boston.
It's different. It's we thought we were getting Boston Consulting Group, but it's a different
surprise. Yeah.
I lived in Boston for 3 years. Beautiful city. So thank you for joining us. I think we have more than 40 people in the room. Definitely
yes, good.
Another 1,000, but not 10. And ladies first. So I'm going to start with Priya. What surprised you? Were you surprised? And if you were surprised, what surprised you in this year's show?
So I think the thing that surprised me and interested me lots was AT&T's emphasis on the connected car. So considering that the explosion of IoT and the 5G protocol was all meant to support the connected car, we haven't really seen it or heard of it all these years. So it's been great that actually seeing AT&T do a big splash. They've got a set of solutions. Yesterday, Cameron set a really nice historic context on the history of the connected car, but why now? And so that was something that was particularly interesting. And it was also the theme of one of the IBV's recent reports, which was on the connected car and the role of telecom. So it was just interesting to see it being amplified here. So that was something that caught my attention.
Thank you. Perfect. David, anything to comment?
On the positive side, I had the opportunity to go see the Digital Divide panel yesterday, which I thought was fantastic. And the spirit of collaboration in some cases across the communication service providers I thought was surprising. I don't think they're known for getting along very frequently. But on a topic like Digital Divide, I thought that was great. I'm surprised a little bit on how I would perceive as behind many of the major telcos here are as it relates to Gen AI use cases. I thought in terms of agenda, it was a fantastic breadth of conversations about generative AI. I think that's what we're seeing a lot at BCG this year is just many of our clients really investing heavily in it. And I think I'd probably characterize telco right now as a little bit behind other industries in terms of actually implementing strategically important solutions. So that was a little bit of a negative surprise. I think we all got caught off guard a little bit by the net neutrality commentary over the past 48 hours or so. I don't think anyone thought there were huge implications to that, but I think that surprised everyone. So those would be three.
Peter?
So I have to completely agree in terms of the generative AI discussion. I think it's been impressive. Probably not surprising, given that we know it's a huge topic. I'm not actually surprised about telcos being a little bit slow. It's new. They've been slow on AI kind of in general, so being a little bit slow on generative AI isn't too surprising. They're still trying to figure it out. And I think they have legitimate concerns around things like security, data security. They know that they have such a reputation there. I think on a very specific surprise, though, it was interesting to see some of the RAN virtualization, Open RAN work, and the fact that we've seen, and I don't want to say they're an unknown player, but you hadn't always heard a lot about AMD playing in the space, and then we saw announcements from Samsung and Ericsson both talking about working with AMD, and it was a nice reminder of how, as much as Open RAN and RAN virtualization is supposed to be about supply chain diversity in part, that still at the silicon layer there wasn't that much diversity, and so that it's nice to see that moving forward, and I think it was a bit of a surprise.
Very good. Priya, anything to add?
So on the generative AI, I agree that in general, the telecom industry tends to be slow, but one particular area that we have seen movement is, of course, in the customer service, because they've been using chatbots and AI, and we have been working with clients who have had generative AI going in, so it's like summarization of the call transcripts, beginning to look at it, but you're absolutely right from a piloting standpoint. But we also think that this is really big. So I did hear some folks talk about it as whether it's overhyped. But when you look at the amount of data and then the potential of what generative AI can do, this is going to be as big as the birth of the internet, perhaps. So that's where we see it going. But yes, it's a journey.
David, you said you were surprised by net neutrality being discussed or being a topic. I'd like you to shed more light. Why were you surprised? It's always being discussed.
I don't want to get too much into politics. I think the FCC was caught off guard by some of the Biden comments. I think everything I've read, and I think some of the perception here, was that it's not necessarily going to be a huge, it's not going to have huge implications necessarily. And maybe it's a nothing burger, but it could be distracting. And I think there was a kind of sigh of annoyance if you read like what Moffett wrote in the past 24 hours. And then I think that there's some interesting, so day one, keynote one, John Saw from T-Mobile gets up and talks about network slices and opening up, to their dev edge platform, the ability for any developer to go start building, quality network slicing applications. Network slicing was one of the original use cases kind of pointed at in 2016 and 2017 when net neutrality became a really big thing is there going to be, implications between the two? And so it was interesting to me, the timing between those two. I was surprised by the commentary. I don't think I'm surprised by what the implications are in the industry, but maybe a little annoyed.
Okay, perfect. We have 14 minutes of these guys speaking, so I would like to make it very interactive. I feel like I'm in interrogation rooms. I really can't see if any hands are raised, but if somebody has a question to the panelists, do feel free to let me know. Definitely not by raising your hand, because I can't see your hands if they're raised.
We'll all keep our eyes out.
Yeah, just
wave your hands, and wave your hands,
or make a noise or something. Yeah. For 2024, you've seen what MWC Las Vegas offered in 2023. What would be your ideal, let's say, topics for 2024? It's going to be October 2024, right? Yes. Priya.
Well, with the emergence of APIs and eSIMs, I think one of the interesting aspects is to see whether business models as well as whether new partners begin to work with telecoms to create new solutions, which we haven't seen so far. But it is the opening up to the developers. It's the opening up of eSIMs. It creates the potential for a lot of new things. We are now not reliant on just the telecom operators having to do the work. So it will be something that I would look forward to.
So basically, the materialization of Open Gateway and the unleashing of innovation, hopefully. Perfect. Go with Peter now.
Yeah, I think it's what the event tried to do this year, and I think it's starting off on a good path towards doing it, is really pulling that B2B focus. right? Of how do we differentiate this event? How is it sort of like, what's going to be the focus? And so I think you saw that with the key sponsors, right? You had all the major US operators here, but it was all their business divisions. You saw the DevCon that was held. And so I think keeping up that focus of building on it, right? To Priya's point, right? How we take the open API stuff, how we integrate that with things like eSIM, but really getting those developers in those industries here, right? So that those industries and the people can sort of hear from the industry, understand how they can take advantage of these technologies, if they're allowed to do a slice without getting in trouble with someone who knows, right? But how do they, and I think you're right. I mean, John Saw did a really good job. I think what he called out, which was really powerful, was saying, look, I don't want a developer to come to me and ask for a slice. That shouldn't happen. Like that's failure. It's failure if he has to come to me and we have to engineer it. They should just be able to figure this out through open APIs. That's right. Bringing those folks here and getting more of that enterprise feel here and that vertical feel will be, it'd be really good.
David?
I mean, couldn't agree more. I'd say also, maybe just to not repeat, VR, AR. So I saw a couple of demos this week. They weren't necessarily fantastic. I think the Vision Pro coming out imminently, I think will be a great opportunity for us to do a retro in a year and see what's happened to the VR kind of community and ecosystem, and has it driven any sort of value in the telco industry. So that would be one.
That's right. We really haven't talked much metaverse. Like it feels like
Correct,
it feels like generative AI has sucked the air out of the metaverse.
Pretty much right.
Deservingly so, I think, also.
Ouch. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go to the audience to be able to see them, and if anybody has a question, have the mic. So no pressure.
Oh, there's one.
Here you go. Okay, I need your name and social security number, please.
I'm Canadian, so I don't do social security numbers. Isabel Frere. I used to be an analyst, so I'll put my analyst hat on. I'm wondering about the evolution that you're seeing in terms of the verticals that the industry is focusing on. Before it was smart city, and it just sort of seems like now it's evolving into the, I'd like to call it the bread and circuses stage of sports and entertainment, but then there's also the age tech, connected car, although they're saying this morning that it's 5 years out, 5G and in cars and ITS. What do you see next year or even the year after in terms of the verticals that you're going to be focusing on?
Who would like to take that, David?
I mean, you mentioned H-Tech. Like, again, John Saw, one of his other announcements is around the partnership with Boston Children's and the 5G relationship there, the hybrid 5G. And when we were talking to him later that day, we talked about how hard healthcare has been to break into, especially in payer providers, because of a lot of the same reasons you talked about that's hard in telco, all the data issues and privacy and regulatory issues. Because of that, it's been incredibly slow, I think, to create any value between 5G and healthcare. I'm very excited about them getting the ball rolling there and starting to hopefully prove out how that can be valuable. I think there's huge implications on care outcomes if telcos can help enable that right. And it's a huge potential market that has been completely untapped to this point. So from a vertical standpoint, the payer provider space for sure.
It's a really good, I mean, it's a great question. And as we think about this, I think what's interesting is, right, we can talk about automotive, and you're right, I mean, it was a big push. It was kind of cool to hear that. We can talk about healthcare. I think the thing we kind of forget is, like, the investment cycles on those things, right? I mean, it's tough, right? Healthcare, for all the reasons we know from data privacy, right? Automotive, designing, I mean, the design cycle for a car, right? You need to be in there today for something several years out from now. And so this stuff is always going to take a while. And then you mentioned smart cities, right? Smart cities are crazy because who owns that network within the city? And it's actually multiple different use cases. So I think, you are still seeing, but they all make sense, right? Because there's broad coverage and mobility, so they feel like they're good fits, but it's hard, right? And so I do think, manufacturing is the same way, right? We understand there's opportunities, but it's hard. So it really is just, depending upon the operator, them, I think, and you see different picks for each of them where they want to develop those capabilities, but then just continuing to push this. Because the thought that it was going to happen overnight was just silly, right? It's going to take that extended commitment and proof points, right, like you see, to actually see how it works.
I think there's also what I've been watching over the last couple of years, a lot of pilots happening at ports, right? 5G in ports, because ports, in a sense, are a consolidation of so many different industries. And I'm based in London, and I've seen several of our operators there doing pilots with ports. There's the potential to do something significant there because ports are wide area, very large areas, and there's the potential to look at whether it's autonomous trucks, whether it is all of the IoT devices, whether it's securing the port, so the visual inspection, whether it's robotic dogs or drones, everything kind of comes together. But there are challenges because you can't have drones easily around a port for security reasons and so on. So people are working things out. So that's one more industry that I'd throw in.
Which I think actually, and you really bring up a good point though, which ties back to what we were saying before, is the issue of regulation. I think to the question of how we see the sort of progress with verticals, I think you always have to consider how regulation fits in there. I mean, drones is a great example. We did some work with BT earlier in the year just to look at drone regulations around the world. And in some countries, they're super ahead of the curve and they're supporting the industry. In some, US included, they don't quite have their act together, right? And so I think that's a huge lever on how those industries develop.
In Jordan, my country, if you need to use a drone for civilian purposes, you need to apply to the police department, and then they'll set up a date and time for you where you'll be accompanied by a policeman while you're operating your drone. So this is how regulations differ. Peter, you have a question.
Thank you, Jawad. Peter Lyons. My question is, if we look at the sort of, the topic of like Gen AI, and it was metaverse last year, and entertainment and sports. A parallel industry that talks a lot about public and private networks is the blockchain and distributed ledger industry. Where do we see like any kind of intersection? Because on the one hand, you have all this data, but do you have a means to sort of like test and know the provenance of the data? Like, how can we have AI without a distributed ledger, and what's the role of the operators?
Well, I have the snarky answer. I mean, the snarky answer, the connection between things like generative AI and distributed ledgers is the NVIDIA stock price. GPUs for driving crypto, GPUs for I mean, yeah, not a bad place to be. I think it is interesting how I can say that from an operator perspective, there's a lot of ways of how they think about how they can use anything blockchain related, roaming, contracts. I think those questions, though, around data, I think are still sort of bogging them down, and also where this lives, right? Like where does this live within an organization? And that's one of the critical challenges that every operator faces, right? It's large organizations. Is this an IT issue? Is this a network issue? Is this a billing issue? And I think that's kind of weighed it down. But to your point, hopefully the push on generative AI can maybe get the ball rolling on some of this. I'm sure maybe you guys have probably looked at this a little bit more than...
I haven't. I mean, I think it's an ecosystem issue as well, right? It kind of takes two to tango, or in this case, I think a pretty broad ecosystem to make it all work. And so I think you're still a ways off. I don't know enough about blockchain, like, candidly, to comment any further than that.
So I think one of the areas that our major study called the Telecoms Blind Spot highlighted was that enterprise clients are looking for payment solutions from telecom operators. So the moment you start looking at bringing in financial transactions, payments, then blockchain comes in, and this is one of the examples, I think, where you would potentially see cross-industry collaboration, but also the necessity for the telecoms operators to be involved in the blockchain. But as we've talked about, blockchain was seen as significant a few years ago. It hasn't taken off to that extent, but it's also, again, those same issues about data provenance, governance, who is really responsible for that data. Until that's figured out, then you can't do a transaction through the blockchain.
We have time for one final question, short question. Okay.
Hi, thank you. I'm Scott Tam from Elisa Polystar in Canada. So my question is, if we look at just the past week at DTW, it seems automation was a big theme, but not so much here. Why do you think is that?
Well, if I start answering on that one, because I was at DTW as well. The TM Forum's membership is a little different to what the GSMA supports. So that comes with a significant base in technology companies as well as systems integrators. And then they are there to support the telecoms industry. Here, we primarily are talking about a membership of operators, and then we've got all of the supporting members. So that is probably the reason why you see things like, they lay out the business process framework, they lay out the architectures, therefore they're looking at things like automation. It is an important area because with data and AI, you look at process automation, and that should be something we are discussing here, and it's a fair point that it isn't. But I think that might be the contextual history about why not.
I mean, there was a little bit of automation. I mean, I think we earlier, the first day of the event, held a summit around sustainability, and automation was a huge part of some of the solutions that we heard. I've seen some stuff on the AI and automation front from Arcus. But I think to Priya's point, as an example, this last weekend, some of us were in Basking Ridge in New Jersey to support the GSMA's strategy group and technology group and the board meetings that they have there. And we ran a session on generative AI with some of the chief strategy officers. And in this roundtable I ran, just talking to them, I said, one of the questions was, what can the GSMA do to help operators think about generative AI and understand how to put it into use? And the question was training. Like, could we run training sessions and help them? And one of the operators said, I would go to the TM Forum for that. I don't see you guys as the ones to sort of think about how this fits into back office processes and automation. And it's to your point, Priya. I mean, we do specific things. The TM Forum does a really good job with what it does, and you try not to boil the ocean.
I have the red light. Our time is up, but David, I'll give you 15 last seconds.
Telcos have done a great job of heavily investing in automation. Based on my experience, I think they were probably ahead of the curve. I think where they're at now, or certainly where they should be, is reimagination. So I think you've seen a lot of A to Z processes become automated. I'd say instead of running through the alphabet, they need to be thinking more about how to get from A to Z in one jump. And automation, in some cases, can be a detriment to that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the last day of MWC Las Vegas. See you in Barcelona.
Thank you.